All right, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover what I honestly think is the ultimate behind-the-scenes tech heist, how the developers of Grand Theft Auto 3 pulled off a seemingly impossible technological leap. Back in 2001, the video game industry was completely flipped on its head. And it wasn't just because of the franchise's notoriously controversial gameplay. The real revolution, the one that actually altered the course of digital entertainment forever, was happening entirely under the hood. You gotta remember, the late 90s and early 2000s were an absolute graveyard for 2D franchises trying to make the jump into 3D. Beloved series were literally crashing and burning because translating complex, fast-paced mechanics into a three-dimensional space was just a monumental headache. So today, we're going to break down the exact technical hurdles this specific studio faced, the immense pressure they were under, and how a few brilliant, outside-the-box workarounds fundamentally changed gaming as we know it.
So, the team at DMA Design, who you probably know better today as Rockstar North, faced a physics problem that frankly looked insurmountable. They were shifting gears to develop for the highly anticipated PlayStation 2, and they had this incredibly massive vision, a fully 3D, living, breathing world. But okay, here is the wild part. The PlayStation 2? It only had 32 megabytes of main RAM. Seriously, think about that for a second. Today, your web browser probably uses 50 times that amount just to keep a few tabs open. They faced the terrifying task of cramming this incredibly complex city simulation. We're talking pedestrians, traffic lights, weather systems, towering skyscrapers into strict memory limitations that made the idea of a seamless city almost laughable. Basically, if they couldn't figure out how to squeeze an ocean of data into a digital thimble, the game simply wasn't going to happen.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this leap, we have to look back at the messy, bug-filled DOS era of the franchise's past. The original games were defined by this fixed top-down view and flat 2D sprites. And the development process? It was incredibly rudimentary. In fact, it was so chaotic that the creators were literally drawing out the game's city streets by hand on these massive sheets of graph paper that just spilled right off their desks and onto the floor. Now contrast that archaic paper and pencil process with the wild new ambition spearheaded by project director Leslie Benzies. His team wanted to entirely ditch that flat history. They were aiming to deliver fully realized 3D environments that offered unparalleled immersive gameplay, literally dropping the player right down onto the pavement. It was a total paradigm shift.
Now, to build this massive 3D ambition, they needed a powerhouse engine built for pure speed. So they licensed Renderware, which was a highly capable 3D game engine created by Criterion. What makes this super fascinating is that Renderware had actually already proven it could handle intense, blistering speeds in the classic arcade racing game Burnout. So DMA Design brought it in to serve as the structural foundation for all their physics and rendering. But here's the thing. Taking an engine designed to quickly load closed, looping racetracks and breaking it wide open to support a sprawling, unpredictable metropolis? Yeah, that's a completely different beast. Having a good engine wasn't a magic wand. They still had to tear right into its core code and heavily modify it to accommodate an open-ended, omnidirectional world where players could just go anywhere at any time.
But trying to force an entire breathing city through a PlayStation 2 processor, it resulted in immediate, catastrophic hardware crashes. The console simply did not have enough memory to load a fully realized 3D city all at once. Like, rendering the basic geometry and roads was one thing, but attempting to process the whole city simultaneously, the towering buildings, the AI routines of the traffic, the pathing of the pedestrians, it would absolutely choke the hardware. Now, in traditional game development back then, you'd solve this by chopping the game up into small levels separated by really long loading screens. But standard level loading design wasn't going to cut it for their vision. They wanted a totally seamless experience, which meant they had hit a complete technological brick wall.
The entire project, and honestly probably the future of the company, was saved by an incredibly ingenious workaround engineered by programmers Leslie Benzies and Adam Fowler, alongside lead artist Aaron Garba. These three innovators looked at their smoking dev kits and realized that playing by the traditional rules of rendering was just impossible. If the hardware couldn't hold the whole city at once, well, they had to bypass the console's memory limits entirely. They needed a way to dynamically feed the PlayStation 2 only the exact data it needed at any given microsecond, essentially tricking the machine into thinking it was holding a whole world when it was really only juggling a tiny fraction of it.
So the solution they came up with was basically an elegant three-step technical heist. First, they built a massive, super low-memory skeleton of the basic road geometry across the entire map. The console could handle that broad wireframe easily. Second, and this is where the pure genius kicks in, they figured out how to stream the heavy, high-detail textures and environmental assets directly off the spinning game CD, triggering them based entirely on player proximity. By carefully prioritizing simple geometry in the distance and dynamically loading the really intensive graphical details only when they were immediately necessary right in front of the player's camera, they nailed step 3. They successfully circumvented the hardware constraints, creating a seamless world without a single mid-game loading screen.
You know how older 3D games had that thick, oppressive fog everywhere? That was actually just a cheap trick to hide the fact that the level was slowly loading in right in front of your face. Well, GTA 3 ditched the fog for what they called a bubble. Imagine an invisible sphere of rendering that is just constantly following your character or your car. As you drive recklessly through Liberty City, the game engine is rapidly spinning the CD, continuously loading brand new, high-res data into the front edge of that bubble, and simultaneously dumping the data you just left behind at the back edge. It creates this flawless illusion of a massive infinite world, while the console is only ever actually rendering a tiny localized chunk of it at any given moment. Brilliant, right? Now that the massive memory issue was solved by this streaming bubble, the dev team was finally free to take all that saved RAM and use it to breathe some incredible life into Liberty City. I mean, they layered in a staggering amount of immersive new tech. They utilized a newly purchased mocap studio to create full motion capture cutscenes, bringing in real actors to give the digital characters cinematic weight. They threw in randomized weather effects and continuous day-to-night cycles that totally changed the mood of the streets dynamically. Plus, they built a revolutionary third-person targeting system, all backed by realistic car physics where your vehicles could actually tip, roll, and, much to the dismay of terrible digital drivers everywhere, spontaneously combust if you took too much damage.
This engine overhaul also finally killed off the dreaded tank controls of the 90s. If you were gaming back then, you absolutely remember the frustration of awkward, fixed camera angles, where you couldn't even see the enemies standing right in front of you. It was so restrictive. But now, players were suddenly handed modern dual joystick freedom. The new mechanics allowed for precise left joystick movement, while utilizing the right joystick for total 360-degree camera control. They added a really sophisticated lock-on targeting system for fluid combat, and even sprint bursts to let you desperately escape danger. This pushed the action entirely out of the clunky arcade era, and it fundamentally established the gold standard for modern third-person control schemes that we are literally still using today.
But you know, the true genius of all that freed-up memory wasn't just in the slick visuals or the modern controls, it was in the AI simulation, which gave birth to the legendary 6-tier wanted system. The world actually reacted to the player's chaos dynamically. Get a 1-star rating, and local beat cops will just casually walk up and try to arrest you for a minor infraction. But hit 3 stars, the AI steps it up significantly with aggressive driving and active gunfire. And if you keep pushing the simulation to the absolute brink and hit the maximum 6 stars, the game literally routes military AI to your location. A minor traffic violation can quickly escalate into full-blown martial law, with army transports and heavily armored tanks dropping right onto the city streets to hunt you down.
Think about this. Every single time you seamlessly drive from one end of a massive map to the other in a modern video game without hitting a single loading screen, you are experiencing the direct technological ripple effect of this exact workaround. The streaming breakthrough achieved by Benzies, Fowler, and Garbett didn't just launch this specific game to unprecedented sales, it literally laid the foundational blueprint for the entire modern open-world genre. By figuring out how to dynamically stream geometry and textures around a moving player using that invisible bubble, they created a standard that not only every subsequent game in their own franchise would follow, but pretty much every massive sandbox game on the market to this day.
So, a relatively small team in Scotland managed to completely bypass the incredibly strict limits of the PlayStation 2 using an invisible loading bubble. And in the process, they fundamentally changed how we experience digital worlds forever. It's an incredible story, and it really leaves you wondering, as hardware continues to evolve and creators are pushed to their absolute limits, what seemingly impossible technical barrier will developers break next? The future of gaming tech is absolutely boundless, and it's always being driven by the folks who flat out refuse to accept that something can't be done. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the code.